Being a prince sounds glamorous in fairy tales. In reality, it's mostly about wearing clothes that are slightly too stiff and trying to look interested during incredibly long, incredibly boring diplomatic dinners. My name is Prince Julian, which sounds much more important than I feel most days. My kingdom is a tiny, picturesque place nestled between two larger, more aggressive nations, meaning my life has been one long training session on how to smile while negotiating trade deals and avoiding international incidents. My sanctuary has always been the library. A massive room full of dusty volumes that smelled of old paper and history, a place where no one expected me to discuss troop movements or agricultural subsidies. One evening, I was tucked away in a corner with a particularly dense tome on ancient mapmaking when a footman, a new guy, judging by the slight wobble of the tray he carried, came in with a letter. It wasn't formal stationery. It was plain parchment, sealed with simple red wax, and addressed to me personally, just Julian. I opened it, curious. The handwriting was messy, urgent. It spoke of secret meetings, a conspiracy within the court itself, and named names I recognized. Lord Vane, the perpetually smiling Minister of Trade. Sir Callan, the captain of the Royal Guard who always seemed a little too eager to agree with my father, the king. The letter claimed they were plotting to sell off the kingdom's grain reserves during the upcoming winter shortage to a rival nation, causing widespread famine for profit. It was wild, unbelievable stuff. I read it twice. My first instinct was to laugh it off as nonsense, a prank. But the names, Lord Vane had always been too smooth, too unctuous. And Callan was the one who personally vetted all the guards, creating a very tight, loyal circle around the king. That I put the letter in my pocket and finished my book, but my mind was racing. I couldn't just march to my father with an anonymous note. He'd dismiss it or worse, warn the plotters. I had to investigate myself. The first step was finding out who left the letter, and the library seemed the obvious place to start. The footman who delivered it had already disappeared. The gilded cage of the palace suddenly felt a lot smaller and a lot more dangerous. My life of quiet study had just collided with the reality of power, and I wasn't sure I was ready for it. That night, sleep didn't come easy. I kept staring at the letter on my desk, the messy script staring back at me like an accusation. The next morning, I decided to start with Lord Vane. I found him in the Great Hall, overseeing the placement of a new tapestry. He was all smiles, as usual. "Lord Vane," I said, trying to sound casual, like a prince just making conversation instead of conducting a clandestine investigation. "The harvest reports have been promising, haven't they?" He beamed, his eyes a little too bright. "Indeed, Your Highness. A surplus this year, quite a blessing. We shall weather the winter with ease." "Excellent," I said, trying to gauge if the sweat on his brow was from the warm hall or my question. "Good work by your office, ensuring the smooth movement of goods." "Always diligent," he replied smoothly, bowing slightly. "Your father, the king, values efficiency." He moved off and my gut twisted. He hadn't lied outright, but there was a guardedness in his tone that confirmed my suspicions. He was hiding something. Next was Sir Callan. I found him in the training yard, observing the guards' practice drills. He was a man of few words, all business. "Captain," I greeted him. "Prince Julian," he acknowledged with a sharp salute. "Tell me," I said, dropping my voice slightly, "with the surplus of grain, has security around the granaries been tightened? To prevent opportunistic thieves, perhaps?" Callan didn't miss a beat. "The king's security is paramount, Your Highness. All assets are secure. The men are loyal." He gave me a direct look, his expression unreadable. "Utterly loyal." His loyalty comment felt like a challenge, a subtle warning that his eyes were everywhere, even on me. I realized I was out of my depth. These men were seasoned schemers. I was a bookworm. I needed to find the source of the letter. I snuck back to the library just before midnight, hoping whoever had left it might return. The library was dark, save for the moonlight filtering through the high windows. I waited behind a large bookcase, the dust making me sneeze silently. After an hour, the heavy library door creaked open. A young woman entered, carrying a lantern. She wasn't a servant or a noble. She wore simple clothes and carried a satchel. She went straight to the corner where I usually read and pulled a book from the shelf. Tapping the inside cupboard, I stepped out from my hiding spot. She jumped, nearly dropping the lantern. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice shaky but firm. She held the lantern up, her eyes wide with fear, and then recognition. "You got my letter," she whispered. "I did," I said. "Now we talk. Who are you, and what is going on?" "My name is Alara," she said, taking a shaky breath. "And your kingdom is about to be sold for scrap." I knew then my comfortable life was well and truly over. "Sold for scrap," I repeated, my whispered words echoing slightly in the vast, empty library. "Alara, you need to be clearer. What does that mean?" Alara pulled me deeper into the shadows, away from the moonlight. "Lord Vane and Sir Kalen aren't just selling the surplus grain. They're arranging a treaty with the Eastern Kingdom, your rival nation, promising them access to our mountain pass in exchange for gold. They plan to use the grain shortage as a cover story for why the kingdom is so weak and compliant when the Eastern Army marches through that pass come winter." It was a staggering, treasonous plan. My entire world tilted on its axis. My father, the king, was a kind man, perhaps too trusting. "We have to tell my father. He has to know." "We can't," Alara said, the fear in her eyes hardening into resolve. "Kalen has total control of the guard. He filters everything that gets to the king's private chambers. He vets all the food, all the messages. You try to tell your father now, you won't make it past the front door." I felt a wave of helplessness. A prince in my own palace, and I couldn't even speak to my own father. "Then what do we do?" Alara opened her satchel and pulled out a rolled map and another piece of parchment. "We can't get to the king inside the palace. We have to draw them out. The king is due to inspect the southern granaries in 2 days' time. It's the only time he's outside the palace walls without Kalen literally breathing down his neck. The inspection is a public event, heavily guarded." I countered. "How would we get to him then?" "We don't," Alara said, pointing to the parchment. "I managed to get my hands on Kalen's guard rotation for that day. A small section of the patrol route near the old mill will be intentionally undermanned for exactly 12 minutes at 2 p.m. Vane has arranged for a bandit diversion to happen during that time, drawing the remaining guards away. A perfect window for the Eastern Army to breach the area and capture my father." I finished, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. "Or," Alara continued, her eyes locked on mine, "it's a perfect window for us to get to the king and reveal the truth before the diversion happens." I looked at the map, at the tiny red circle marking the mill. This was insane. I was a prince who read books, not fought battles. Yet, here I was, plotting a rendezvous with my father in a 12-minute window of vulnerability created by traitors. The golden cage of my life had shattered, and the real world outside was sharp and dangerous. I folded the map and put it in my pocket, right next to the anonymous letter that started all this. "All right, Alara, we'll do it your way. But we need a plan better than just running up to him and shouting treason." "I have one," she said, a small, grim smile forming on her face. "You just have to be a little less like a prince for a day." The next day passed in a blur of nervous preparation. Alara, it turned out, was the daughter of the head groundskeeper and had eyes everywhere. She secured us 2 horses and simple, dark clothing, the first time I'd worn anything that didn't require a valet to put on. The irony wasn't lost on me. My freedom was tied to dirty stable clothes. We met at the stables just before dawn, the air smelling of wet straw and an anxiety so thick you could almost see it. We rode hard toward the southern granaries. The plan was simple on paper, impossible in execution. Arrive at the old mill just before 2 p.m., wait for the guards to be drawn away by the fake bandit attack, slip through the gap, and reach my father's carriage before the main Eastern force arrived. The whole thing relied on everyone involved acting exactly as the traitors predicted. We reached the mill by 1:45 p.m. The silence was unnerving. This place, usually bustling with activity, was eerily still. At 1:55 p.m., we heard shouting in the distance, the diversion. Alara pulled out the map. 5 minutes. They should be moving the patrols now. We mounted up and spurred the horses through the woods toward the main road where the king's procession would be at 2:03 p.m. We hit the road. It was empty. The main procession must have already passed that specific section of the road. We rode harder, fear a cold weight in my chest. We saw the rear of the royal carriage about a quarter-mile ahead, moving slowly. We pushed the horses. We were almost there when the main event began. A horn blared, not the soft hunting horns of the palace, but a deep, resonant war horn from the mountains. I looked to the ridge above the road. The Eastern Army wasn't relying on Vane's 12 minutes. They were here early in force. The world dissolved into chaos. Arrows rained down. My father's guards, the ones loyal to Kaelin, seemed to melt away rather than fight, leaving the core royal guards exposed. Alara screamed something, perhaps my name, as an arrow took her horse down. I kept riding, a single-minded focus on reaching that carriage. I reached it just as Sir Kaelin pulled the carriage door open, not to protect the king, but to drag him out. "Traitor!" I yelled, pulling out the small, decorative dagger I wore for formal events. A useless piece of metal against Kaelin's sword. Kaelin didn't even look scared. He just smiled that smug, awful smile. "The utility, Prince Julian. Your father was an obstacle to progress." He shoved my father to the ground. A small, fragile man I hadn't realized was so old until that moment that I charged, useless dagger raised. Kaelin sidestepped me easily. The last thing I heard was the sound of a blade. Not metal against metal, but metal against something softer. I turned just in time to see Alara, who had run all the way there, collapse next to my father. She had thrown herself in front of an Eastern soldier's sword meant for him. The king, my father, screamed her name, a raw sound of absolute devastation. The fighting swirled around me, but all I could focus on was Alara, lying still on the dust of the road, the parchment of the guard rotation lying a few inches from her outstretched hand. Vane and Kaelin had been one step ahead the whole time. The timings, the map, it was all a setup. They knew we'd try to reach the king. They planned for our frantic, naive attempt, using us to ensure the king was right where they needed him to be when the main attack came. I was naive. I thought a letter and a map could fix the world. I learned the hard way that history isn't written in dusty books in a safe library. It's written in blood on a dusty road, and the good intentions of a prince are meaningless against the cold reality of power. The golden cage didn't just shatter. It became a tomb for an innocent girl who believed in a prince's capacity to save his kingdom, and I had led her right to it.